Part 1. Horses don't forgive. If you want to know why most cowboys were limping, scarred, or bent before they hit 25, don't start with bullets. Start with horses. Hollywood paints horses as noble companions, loyal partners under the wide western sky. Cowboys knew better. Horses were strong, stubborn, and half wild. 1,000 pounds of muscle and panic balanced on hooves harder than iron. Every cowboy carried the marks of dealing with them. A horse didn't need malice to hurt you. It only needed fear, the sudden crack of thunder, a rattlesnake in the grass, a flap of canvas in the wind. Anything could turn a steady mount into a cyclone. Cowboys were thrown daily. A bad fall meant broken ribs, twisted spines, or a leg bent in ways it never healed right. Some men never walked straight again after their first year in the saddle. Then there were the kicks. A horse's hind legs were as unforgiving as a blacksmith's hammer. One careless step behind the wrong animal, and a cowboy woke up with teeth missing, jaw broken, or worse. Horses broke bones as often as bullets did, and they didn't even mean to. Roping cattle only made things worse. Cowboys had to ride fast, lean hard, and wrap ropes tight around saddle horns. A missed throw, a steer that twisted wrong, or a rope that tangled around the wrist meant disaster. Men were dragged across dirt, burned by rope, or yanked from saddles, with arms half torn from their sockets. Rope burns sounded mild until you saw the angry scars they left, permanent reminders that the rope didn't care who it bit. Branding time was another hazard. Calves bawled, dust rose thick, and cowboys wrestled writhing animals to the ground while irons glowed in the fire. Hooves flailed, horns cut, teeth snapped. A calf didn't have to weigh much to break a man's hand or crush a foot, and the branding irons themselves left their mark not just on cattle, but on cowboys unlucky enough to slip. Burns healed ugly and stayed forever. Even riding without incident aged a man. Days in the saddle wore joints raw, rubbed skin until it blistered, and ground backs down before their time. Cowboys joked that the saddle was just another kind of coffin if you sat in it long enough. It buried you alive. By the time a cowboy hit 25, he'd likely been thrown a dozen times, kicked half as many, dragged at least once, and burned by rope or iron more than he could count. The scars told the story. Crooked fingers, stiff knees, shoulders that popped out when the weather turned cold. A cowboy might laugh about it by the fire, but in truth, the horses owned him as much as he owned them. The myth says cowboys were tough because they wanted to be. The truth is they were tough because horses made them that way. Every limp, every scar, every crooked grin, missing a tooth, those weren't from gunfights in dusty streets. They were gifts from the animals that carried them. And horses, as every cowboy knew, didn't forgive. Part 2. Bullets don't disappear. When people talk about the dangers of the West, they like to imagine the sudden shot that ends everything. Quick, dramatic, clean. But the reality was far messier. Most men didn't die when the bullet hit. They lived and carried that lead with them for the rest of their short, painful lives. That's why by 25, most cowboys walked, breathed, and worked like men twice their age. The pistols of the time didn't make neat wounds. They spat soft lead balls that flattened, tore, and dragged dirt and powder into the body. A shot through the arm didn't just sting, it shattered bone, tore muscle, and left the arm half useless forever. Cowboys carried crooked elbows, stiff shoulders, and hands that shook when they tried to rope. No surgeon fixed them, at best. A barber dug around with a dull knife and poured whiskey to dull the screams. Bullets often stayed inside. Doctors couldn't always find them, and sometimes it was safer not to dig. So cowboys carried them like secret passengers, a piece of lead lodged near a rib, a fragment stuck close to a joint, a flattened ball resting deep in muscle. Every time the weather changed, every time the cold wind blew, the ache returned. Cowboys joked that they were walking barometers, their scars predicting storms. But the laughter was hollow. Gunfights didn't even have to be deadly to leave a man ruined. A stray round that clipped a leg could leave a limp for life. A shot through the cheek might heal, but the scar twisted his smile into something half grimace, half threat. A bullet in the shoulder meant he couldn't lift a saddle without pain. Even if you won the fight, the West made sure you still lost something, and it wasn't only outlaws or lawmen trading fire. Cattle drives brought tempers, whiskey, and pistols into close quarters. Cowboys shot at each other over poker games, women, insults, or just because the night was long and patience short. Many of those bullets didn't kill. They crippled. One man left with a ruined hand, another with a limp, another with a lung that whistled every time he breathed. The trail was full of men who lived through gunfire, but never lived it down. The infections that followed were worse. Even a minor wound could fester. Bandages were rags, water was dirty, and the trail was full of dust. A bullet wound that didn't kill you today might rot your flesh tomorrow. Cowboys knew the smell of fever, the sight of blackened flesh, the sound of a partner groaning through the night. If a man survived, he survived maimed. If he didn't, he became another grave marked with nothing but a wooden cross and a hat hanging on top. By 25, most cowboys had been shot at least once, in anger, by accident, or by sheer bad luck. They carried those shots the rest of their days, a shoulder that never healed right, a knee that buckled without warning, a chest that ached with every breath. Cowboys weren't legends because they were untouched by danger. They were legends because they endured it, scar by scar, until their bodies gave out. The truth is this: bullets didn't disappear. They lingered, they gnawed, and they weighed a man down until he looked 40 before he'd seen 30. The West didn't need to kill you outright. It was content to let you limp along half alive. A scarred reminder of what a cowboy's life really cost. Part 3: Fire, Rope, and Steel. Not every scar on a cowboy came from a horse or a bullet. The West had plenty of quieter weapons, and they left their marks just as deep. Fire, rope, and steel, 3 everyday tools of the trail, carved cowboys into old men before their time. By 25, a working hand's body looked like a map of accidents, burns, cuts, twisted joints, and rope scars that never faded. Branding season was the worst. Calves bald, cowboys wrestled them down in clouds of dust, and branding irons glowed red in the fire. It wasn't a question of if someone got burned, only when. An iron dropped on a boot meant scorched toes. A slip in the dirt could drive. Hot steel against a bare forearm. The smell of singed hair didn't always come from the cattle. Cowboys wore those burns forever. Shiny patches of scar tissue that itched in winter and ached in rain. The fires themselves were dangerous. Every camp needed them, but the prairie winds turned flames wild. Cowboys carried marks from sparks that leapt onto hands, from pots that tipped and spilled boiling coffee, from careless steps into coals in the dark. Sleep-deprived men tripped, slipped, and woke with blisters that became permanent reminders of one careless night. Then there was the rope. Cowboys spent half their lives throwing it, pulling it, and getting caught in it. Roping cattle looked simple from a distance: a swing, a throw, a catch up close. It was chaos. A rope could snap tight around a wrist and drag a man yards before anyone could cut him loose. Fingers broke, shoulders dislocated, and rope burns chewed skin raw. Leather gloves helped, but not enough. The scars of burned skin ran like dark bracelets around many a cowboy's hands. Some joked the rope had branded them as much as the irons did. Steel played its part in the misery. Knives, axes, branding tools, even simple tack could cut deep. Cowboys worked fast, often tired, always surrounded by sharp edges. A slip while cutting jerky meant stitches. A knife dropped in the dark meant a bloody hand. Tools weren't clean. Every cut carried the risk of infection. Many cowboys kept crooked fingers or stiff wrists not from a duel, but from a bad accident while cooking supper or fixing tack. And don't forget the wagons. A wheel spoke cracked across shins could cripple a man for weeks. A falling load of supplies could crush ribs. Even something as simple as hammering a nail with a dull-headed tool could send steel flying into an eye. Cowboys learned to shrug off the small cuts because there were too many to count, but they added up, turning hands into gnarled claws and faces into patched canvases of scars. All of it wore down a body that was already tired from endless hours in the saddle. A 25-year-old cowboy carried burns from branding fires, rope scars across his palms, and more than a few cuts that had healed ugly. His skin told the truth. He wasn't living a storybook life. He was surviving one accident at a time. Fire, rope, and steel. They were as much a part of the cowboy's image as the hat and the pistol. But they left a price no ballad sings about. Cowboys weren't just burned into legends. They were burned into themselves, scar by scar, until even a young man looked like he'd already lived a lifetime. Part 4. The Cowboy's Body at 25. By the time most men in the East were settling into careers, getting married, or buying their first decent suit, a cowboy of 25 looked like he had lived 3 lifetimes. The West took years from a man's body the way poker took coins. From his pocket, quick, casual, and without a thought of giving them back. Start with the walk. Cowboys limped. Some favored the left leg from a horse fall. Others dragged the right from a bullet that never healed straight. Ankles had been twisted too many times on rocky trails. Knees stiff from endless saddle hours. Hips aching from cold nights on the ground. A young man moved like an old one. Joints creaking every time he swung into the saddle. Then the hands. They were clawed things. Fingers crooked from breaks never set right. Palms etched with rope burns. Knuckles swollen from fights, frostbite, or both. A cowboy's handshake wasn't just firm. It was lopsided, stiff, the grip of someone who had lost parts of what made a hand whole. The skin was cracked, darkened by sun, rough as rawhide. These were not the hands of dime novel heroes, but of men chewed up by labor. The face told its own story, missing teeth from a horse's kick, a jaw that had set crooked after being broken in a barroom scuffle, burn scars along the cheek from branding fires, a bullet scar tunneling across the temple, close enough to whisper how near death had come. Cowboys rarely smiled wide, some because they couldn't, others because life hadn't left much to smile about. And the lungs, they carried the trail inside them. Dust storms filled them with grit. Campfires smoked them every night, and bullet wounds sometimes whistled with every breath. Many cowboys coughed like old miners by their mid-20s, spitting into the dirt and waving it off as nothing. The sound of hacking around a campfire was as common as the sound of spurs. Even when nothing was visibly broken, everything hurt. Backs were stooped from years in the saddle. Shoulders ached from roping and lifting. Old wounds ached when the weather turned. Cowboys laughed at their own misery, calling themselves weather prophets, because every storm announced itself first in their bones. But under the jokes was truth. Their bodies were failing long before their time. Clothes hid some of it, but not all. Bedrolls reeked of liniment rubbed into sore joints. Boots carried insoles cut from old blankets to ease ruined feet. Saddles were padded with extra cloth to soothe bruised hips. Every trick was an attempt to make a 25-year-old body feel like it hadn't already reached 50. And yet, despite it all, they rode on. Because the West didn't offer much choice. Work meant pain, pain meant scars, and scars meant survival. A cowboy who still stood at 25, battered and broken, was considered seasoned, not because he had mastered the land, but because he had endured it. That was the cruel arithmetic of the frontier. The price of a cowboy's youth was his body. Horses threw it, bullets marked it, fires burned it, ropes scarred it. By 25, most cowboys carried a lifetime of injuries, and yet they kept riding as if the prairie demanded their very bones. The dime novels never showed this. They wrote of clean-cut heroes, lean but unscarred, riding into the sunset with hats unbent and bodies unbroken. The real cowboys knew better. They rode into that same sunset limping, coughing, scarred, and bent, men who looked twice their age, but had only lived a quarter of their years, and still, they called it freedom.